This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. And boy, are we in for a bit of a treat over the next few weeks. We have entered the West Side Story Redux season. So we already heard last week some of the albums that have been recorded from the score. Over the next 5 weeks, we're going to be going back in time and talking about 5 of the songs from West Side Story. How did I come up with these 5 songs? I kind of picked some of my favorites, some that I thought were the more important ones, but it's hard because, as we discovered even in this episode, like almost every song is iconic in its own way. So like, how do you really trim this down to 5 of quote unquote the most important? You'll see if you even agree with me or not. This is all leading up, of course, to the release of the new movie of West Side Story on December 10th of this year. And I'm very, very excited. So to help us usher along, at least for the next 5 weeks, is Christine Chen. She's been here before. Most recently, she was here for our Pacific Overture season for the song Poems. So I would definitely, if you like what she has to say, go back in time and listen to her on that episode. But you're going to be hearing a lot from her over the next 5 weeks. I'm excited to jump into it. There's no reason to belabor the point here too much. So let's just get into the episode right now.
Maria, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. Maria, all the beautiful sounds of the world in a single word. Maria. Just met a girl named Maria.
Christine Chen, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me back again. It's truly a joy.
The thing about this is that you are going to be on for the next 5 weeks.
Right.
So this is less of you being a guest and more of being like a co-host for this mini-series on West Side Story. I think we need to start by you kind of filling in with the audience a little bit about, I guess, your relationship with West Side Story in general.
I mean, I don't even know what the first instance of West Side Story I've heard is, because it's just one of those things that somehow filtered into my consciousness growing up at some point in my life. And so I definitely knew a lot of the songs, and I was in band in like high school, and we played a lot of the like dances from West Side Story, which, for the record, are very difficult to play because Leonard Bernstein doesn't believe in constant time signature. But yeah, so I knew it from there. I actually hadn't watched the movie until like last week, the original movie.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, it's been, I don't know, like I've seen it on stage a couple times now. One was in a repertory theater and one time was in college, like a college production. And I was never a huge fan of it. It was like, I can appreciate it for what it is, what it did, the representation that I guess more of later productions had, and that sort of thing. But it just like didn't really connect with me, like the whole sort of overly stylized ballet dancer gang members. And then I did get the chance to see this most recent Eva Van Hove revival, which that did actually connect with me a lot more. I saw it twice, once at the beginning of previews and once right before the pandemic shut everything down. And the take that he had on it, where you could just more realistically see all these people as gang members, and like there was more of that level of danger. It was, I understood the desperation more of these teenagers, really, and like why they're so insistent on like we have to be fighting for ourselves, and like, and that sort of take on it really reinvigorated a sort of like appreciation for the material. It just wasn't able to see that lens from before. So but I mean, the music has always been good, and just listening to the instrumentals even is honestly a great way to pass your time.
Yeah, like, so for the past couple of weeks, I've really tried to nail it down. And I understand that the problem is I think I'm looking for one specific answer to why West Side Story has endured. And with so many things, I don't think there is one answer. There's multiple reasons and factors that go into it. Because even Sondheim points out the fact that it really is this like confluence of like Bernstein, of Jerome Robbins, of himself, of Arthur Lawrence, like all of those people together kind of made this thing be a thing. But I don't know if it would have necessarily, who knows, this is an alternate reality now, but I'm not convinced that any one of them, had they had full creative control, would have been able to make West Side Story be West Side Story for like the last 60 years.
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Looking through the songs, like when you had first mentioned this miniseries to me, and before we had decided which songs to do, I was like, every song's like a classic.
I know, and that's the wild thing. Yeah.
And I don't know if there's another show that has like permeated into the consciousness this much. Like when I saw Oklahoma, I was like, okay, yeah, every song is a bop, but like, people know the title song for Oklahoma. They might know people will say We're in Love, Surrey with the Fringe, but then there's still like sort of the more obscure songs or the songs that people don't really care about. But I feel like it's just about every song in West Side Story people do really care about, or, there's something going on with every song.
Yeah, like when you even break it down to see, like, go to the Wikipedia page of any of these songs. It's so funny. It's like, here are all the versions, and here's like 24 people who have covered this song. Like, wow, like it's so interesting. Granted, this was also written kind of just at the very end of that time where pop stars would take stuff from Broadway and adapt it. But still, I guess further to my point here is that when I did the West Side Story season, when I started this podcast, like I knew West Side Story very well. In as far as like I listened to the score consistently and a lot growing up and over the past a bunch of years. I saw the movie version from, when is that, 1961? Gosh, sometime when I was a teenager, and really, really enjoyed it. Even though, even as an adult, I recognized some of the problematic natures of the casting in that movie. But boy, if I could probably go on a tangent of how I think people should film musicals nowadays, and I think they could take lessons from that movie. Regardless, love that movie. I still do love that movie in a kind of nostalgic way. And so it was, I guess, just infused with me. I've actually never seen a version of West Side Story on stage, which is kind of remarkable because I know that there have been productions. Doing that season, though, doing that very first season of this show, what I kind of started to recognize that, oh, you know what it is that I love about West Side Story? It really is like the music and not really the lyrics, which is so funny to start off a podcast about Sondheim's lyrics. Sondheim, I think, is maybe extra critical of himself, but where I will align with him on is like, you can very much tell this is a 26-year-old man doing lyrics basically for the first time in a professional setting, because these are definitely not like his best work. when you really break it down, there's some stuff that like breaks his cardinal rules. There's some stuff that falls flat. It's the music. I honestly do think it's the music from Bernstein that is the biggest one. The ballet that Jerome Robbins also choreographed is great. But I do also think that this is, for the time, I don't know necessarily much anymore, but for the time was experimental. This was not The Music Man. That was the same season. This is very much like, let's try something completely different on Broadway.
Yeah. And like, I think I read that their original lead producer or something had dropped out last minute. Yeah, and then that's when they brought in Hal Prince, and Hal Prince was like totally untested at that point. Everybody thought he was crazy, The
weirdness of how like this infuses like Sondheim's later career. Like if that person had not dropped out, would he have ever met Hal Prince? Would they have ever done those collaborations together? You take one thing out of his life and things go a completely different way. I guess I should just ask you too, just because we're here. As far as the movie goes, you just watched it for the first time last week. For a new viewer, how does that hold up for you?
I mean, I guess the first impression is that it's an old movie. I do think it is very nicely visually shot. Like they really did, I think, capture the scenes really well. And it's been my complaint about like almost every movie musical in the past, like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, where I don't think the directors actually know how to direct a musical.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
Like,
I could go off on this for a while.
yeah, like I actually just saw the Dear Evan Hansen movie last week, which is not as bad as most people have said, but I do agree that the songs did not feel like they had a place in that movie.
Yeah, like I also felt the same way. I feel like I felt like I was being gaslit a little bit because the way that people were talking about that Dear Evan Hansen movie. I also went and saw it last week. It felt like they were saying like, this is the next Cats movie. And I was like,
it's not. No.
Like, it is not that bad. At the same time, it's like, I made the quip as I was leaving. It's like, it's remarkable that director decided that, like, you know what this song needs? Another two shot. And just like two people singing to each other. It's like, do something interesting.
Also, the amount of times that like a person walked down the school hallway, I was like, I guess this is the only thing that teenagers do. But no, I just felt like, because Ben Platt had most of the songs, I was like, Ben Platt just feels like he's on a different plane of existence for half this movie.
Right. Yeah.
But back to West Side Story. I did actually enjoy a lot of the performances. Rita Moreno, of course, and but I think they did do like a fairly good job of telling West Side Story in the traditional way that West Side Story is told. I liked a lot of the changes they made between the stage version to the movie, and I think they did it in a way that flowed really well, because I feel like the biggest thing when turning a musical into a movie, when it's a 2-act musical, is how do you get past intermission? Because everybody is used to 100%. That. I did think that it was a little weird when songs still ended on a button, and it was just sort of like at the end of America, they like hold the pose, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are a few just sort of like stage to film things.
You know what I've actually noticed? This is just gonna be like our button, I guess, as far as like filming musicals, filming stage musicals as a film. People do need, I think, to research these older films, because in this movie they do it. If you watch any Bob Fosse film, like he does it in Sweet Charity, he does it in Cabaret as well, and it just tricks your brain nicely. So like, if when the jets jump up, right, there's a cut, and then they fall down in the next scene. So they've changed places, they've changed things, but the movement is fluid. And so our brain is like, oh, okay, yeah, this is one movement that's happened, even though there's been a cut and stuff that has happened in the interim, and we kind of just fill in the gaps. And I find that the weird thing is that new movie musicals do too many close-ups where you're not actually seeing the movement. It's like it's focused too much on the actual performance. It's like, no, let's take a look at what's going on around people.
There was that one interview with Patti LuPone about the Les Mis movie, and they're asking her like, oh, did you see it? Whatever. And she was like, you can't film so close up that you can see the snot in their noses. You have to be able to see the whole scene and the context. And like, it's not just about this person's performance. It's about what they're talking about, and like, singing through the song and not just singing the song. And I think the other thing that a lot of musicals nowadays, or the movie musicals nowadays, don't know, and not to pick on Dear Evan Hansen again, but I feel like they also did not do this particularly well, is how you enter and exit a song when it's not sung through. Yeah. And just like, because, it is unnatural when you have movies are so much more realistic than theater. And so when people start singing, it has to be a big enough momentum for them to start singing. And I felt like in Dear Evan Hansen, it felt like they could have just kept talking. But
yeah. No, I agree.
Songs didn't feel earned.
Yeah, I think Dear Evan Hansen, what they kind of needed to do was not every song would have been able to work this way, but for some of them, I think they needed to do the Chicago fix, which is like, this is happening in their head, and we're going to go completely fantastical, theatrical with this, and then bring it back.
And that was the thing with songs like For Forever and Words Fail, was they kept doing this thing where this is where I felt like where Ben Platt was on a different plane of existence, where he was singing and it sounds conversational, but they would keep cutting back to the rest of the family who was listening to him sing. Yeah. And they would either respond or something, and it would be like, okay, wait, is he singing? Because in the show, like on stage, he sings it to the crowd. He's not necessarily singing it directly to the family. And so just sort of figuring out like what is being said verbatim and stuff. And in West Side Story, I feel like because the entire thing is stylized from the beginning. Like it does a good job
100%.
of the overture sets you up for what you're about to see, with the ballet moves and like the dance. So you already know it's not going to be like everything you see is everything that's actually happening. And I think that helps it a lot. Like you need some sort of concept behind it, I think.
Well, someone who would agree with you, I mean, I agree with you too, but another person who would agree with us is Mr. Stephen Sondheim. So what, interesting enough, what I did this week, I didn't watch the entire movie again because I actually did just do a rewatch of West Side Story, weirdly enough, here a few months ago. Mm-hmm. I own it on iTunes, and there's a special features section there. And one of the special features is Sondheim doing commentary for each of the songs in the score. So I just went through there. So you basically it's a really quick way to get through the movie because it's just like all the songs. And I feel like it was from another interview. Like he wasn't actually in the studio watching what was going on because sometimes it doesn't fill the entire song. What he says about the Jet song and the prologue at the very beginning is like they had toyed around a little bit with exactly how to do it, but the most important thing in a musical, this is him saying this, the most important thing about a musical is that very first song because it has to set the stage, tell you what the show is about, give you kind of a sense of like what to expect for the rest of the evening. And that was hard because this was mostly a dance show, this kind of operatic music. We have to understand that there's these two rival gangs. And he was trying to figure out how to have them sing this back and forth. And then there's like, well, let's just use dance at the very beginning. And he says it was the best decision we did because that does set the tone, from that very like first minute. OK, this is a dance that's going to happen this entire show. And so, yeah, I always respect that. And now I'm going to look at that every time I watch a movie. It's like, is this beginning song really setting the stage properly?
Well, so there's this book called The Secret Life of the American Musical by Jack Bertel. And it takes apart the structure of musicals, how they're put together and general characteristics that each one has. And so he has a different chapter for like each number. And the first one, he says, I think he might be quoting someone else in this, but he's saying like when the curtain goes up, the audience is lost and it's your job as the writer to make them not lost, because when the curtain goes up, they have no clue who these characters are, what their motivations are, anything. And that's why a lot of the times the opening number of a show is like one of those, let's introduce every character in this show sort of thing. So this was a whole new style of doing it, which actually goes back to Carousel started with a ballet as well. And so that was like, the first one to do that. It tells you the backstory through dance without any spoken word.
Carousel, this show, there's another one I had in my head and now I've totally blanked on it. But yeah, there's a few shows that just like dance is like a primary backbone of this. And I get it. I don't know why I get so defensive a little bit about this because I've heard other podcasts talk about musicals and even Friends and stuff. And like the term sometimes that is thrown around is cheesy, and that I don't know, when I hear that word I always take it as a negative connotation, and I guess some people don't necessarily mean it that way, but when I hear cheesy I immediately think what you're saying is that this is bad. But from my point of view, it's just like when you're coming into a musical, yes, they're doing stylized language, yes, there are these tough and rumble guys that are using ballet moves to express themselves, but that's all I don't know, that's how these creators are using movement and song and the trappings of musical theater to express their point of view. And so I don't know, maybe I just am really easy at suspending my disbelief. That's just never bothered me.
I mean, that's a thing that you, I think, learn when you're a theater person is just, like part of the fun of theater is being able to see how they use things like that to create a story that you wouldn't have. Like, I mean, just take Hamilton as an example with using rap music to tell the story of like the founding fathers. Like, there's a lot of suspension of disbelief that has to happen for you to be able to get on board with that. But, it works. And there's a reason for that. Like, there's a reason why rap is the primary language of that show. Like ballet is a primary language of this show. And I mean, I said before, like it didn't work for me before, but I understand why it does. I just didn't personally like it.
I think the other biggest thing I think at least for a modern audience to get on board with West Side Story is one, it is very much a 1950s show. Like, you can tell this was written at a time where maybe the language wasn't exactly there to talk about like racial politics effectively, gender politics effectively. It's there, and I think there's an attempt at critiquing the contemporary day, but still it is a 1950s show, which is, I think, a good thing that Spielberg in this new movie, not that I've seen it yet, is setting it in the 1950s, because if you try to update it way too much, I don't know if it necessarily works 100%.
Yeah. And even just when I was looking through the songs, like, I'm sure we'll get to it later, but I was like, I feel pretty could have some underlying commentary that you would not expect depending on how it's done and how it's directed. But yeah, it is still, I mean, at its core, it's still Romeo and Juliet, where I feel like is a story that people know so well that it just has become a bit of a mockery of like, or like people on principle don't like that story because it's like, oh, these stupid teenagers, they only knew each other for 2 days. Now they're like killing themselves over each other and like that sort of thing, where it is also just another, you have to suspend your disbelief to a certain extent. But at the same time, it's also, especially in West Side Story, it's how much of this love story are you supposed to believe in and how much of it is the commentary.
True.
Like,
yeah, that's a good
point.
The
entire love story is essentially a plot device for commentary. Like, you can see the show in that aspect as well.
Oh, that's a good point. Like, yeah, is this show really a love story, or is it that as an entry point into like this commentary on like violence, gangs, white versus Puerto Rican? Like, there's a lot of other stuff that's wrapped into that. Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that in that way before. You know, I'm thinking of two different things. What the first is that talking about like the Romeo and Juliet that this is based off of pretty deeply. I always felt the same way. I remember learning about Romeo and Juliet and watching films of Romeo and Juliet, and it always bugged me a little bit because it's like, why does this always feel off to me? And then that finally clicked because there's this, I forget if it's in the 60s. I think it's a 60s film by an Italian director, by Zeffirelli, where he actually cast a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old in those roles. And it's like, oh, this makes way more sense when it's like, yeah, of course, they're preteens. They think they're in love, but they're not really. But they go to the largest extent of that and then decide to kill themselves. So there's that. But then I also think that, you know, whether it's Shakespeare, now with a lot of musical theater and stuff, it gets so mythologized over time. Like, I just last night went and saw the new James Bond film. And what I think is so interesting about the recent Daniel Craig Bond film specifically, if you're steeped in Bond mythology, like a weirdo that I am, kind of the same thing, right? The James Bond character was created in the 50s. We know him a lot because of the movies made in the 60s with Sean Connery. But is of a time, right? Like, that character is in like a very much of a different time than a contemporary audience. And the Craig series, these 5 movies, what I have found the most interesting is how it is both commenting on that, trying to be a contemporary story, wrestling with the mythology that James Bond has already, while at the same time remixing all of those earlier films and updating them. It's so interesting how some of the plot points in those early films were just redone for a modern audience now. I think West Side Story is doing the kind of same thing in a Romeo and Juliet thing. Like, we kind of know innately how this show is going to end. Even if you didn't know that this is a Romeo and Juliet story going in, at a certain point, it's like, oh, I think I kind of know how this is all going to shake out. But it's kind of like there's a famous quote by Roger Ebert, a piece of art, and he's talking about movies in this case, but like a movie is not good or bad based on what it is about, it's how it is about it. And that's what I've always thought, right? It's like, yeah, I might know how this is going to end, but how are you going to get me to that end?
Right.
That's what's the interesting part.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I mean, like, you know, if you just look at Disney movies, you're pretty much guaranteed a happy ending in Disney movies. Yeah. But it's the idea of like, and I think this is why Disney makes such good musicals too. It's like, you have to create what looks like an unsurmountable problem before you can get to that happy ending.
Right.
So they've got it down. they know what they're
doing. and they only make a few $1 billion each year.
Yeah.
Sorry for breaking into the middle of the episode here, but I do have some people and organizations that I do need to help thank. First and foremost, though, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That's, of course, greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make this show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page. But please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thank you to the God That's Good tier from Patreon, the triumphant quintet of Jack, Todd, Carrie, Whitty, and Louise. Putting It Together is, of course, a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. Listen, the winter months are here, at least in Canada, where I am at, and so there might be some cold drafts, maybe some flickering lights going on in your home, and maybe a leak that you have no idea where it's coming from. Well, if you've ever wondered what's really going on in your home, Rumi's Ask a Home Inspector service can help. You can connect with a certified professional home inspector by phone or video call and get your questions answered. Rumi will let you know what's easily fixable with a little DIY, or when you might need to call in some professional help. Visit rumi.ca, that's RUMI.ca, and book your Ask a Home Inspector appointment today. This episode of Putting It Together is also brought to you by the Alberta Association of Optometrists, proudly celebrating a century of caring for Albertans. You know, it happens. Many people don't call their optometrist first for urgent eye care when they need it. From spring cleaning mishaps to winter eye infections, if you or your family have an eye emergency, doctors of optometry are trained to diagnose, treat, and prescribe medications. No referral necessary. And just a reminder, Alberta health coverage is available towards your urgent eye care appointment. To find an optometrist in your area, you can visit optometrists.ab.ca. The Alberta Association of Optometrists represents almost 800 doctors of optometry in over 80 communities across the province. Members are highly trained, regulated health professionals who provide primary eye health and vision care to Albertans. You can learn more at optometrists.ab.ca. Let's get into what we're talking about here today. We are going to be speaking about the song Maria. Just as a kind of a very quick preface, just in case people are following along at home and can't quite remember, I didn't prep you for this, Christine, but what has happened in the show up until this point?
Well, so we've seen this, I don't know how long the prologue is, but a fairly long ballet of these two gangs are enemies. The Sharks are the Puerto Rican gang and the Jets are the white. It sort of depends on the production, but generally they're like either immigrants or Polish or something.
Yeah.
But another gang, they're all teenagers. And at this point we have seen Tony before, who is part of the Jets gang, but sort of taking a sabbatical, I guess. And he thinks that there's something that is going to happen, that it's going to change his life. And the rest of the gang convinces him to go to this dance at the gym, which is sponsored by the adults trying to make peace between the gangs.
Right.
And while there, he meets this girl, Maria, who is, of course, the a Puerto Rican girl who is Bernardo, the shark leader, his sister. And they, fall in love on sight. There's a whole lighting cue. There's, magic happens. And
I still love, again, it is a bit dated at this point. I still like how they blur out everyone else in the movie version of that moment. It's like a great visual, of course.
It's a very obvious, Vaseline on the lens moment, which I had a chuckle at. But I mean, if I'm assuming they're doing a similar thing with this movie, but with cooler effect or more naturalistic effects, I guess. But they look at each other across the room. They're suddenly madly in love. And then Bernardo spots them kissing and he loses his mind. And they basically, the whole dance turns into a fight. And right before Tony has to, or Maria has to leave, he just hears that her name is Maria. And so because he is madly in love now, he sort of just wanders down the street singing about Maria. And
yes,
like this is the only thing he knows about her is her name.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the classic Sondheim quote that I've referenced, I believe, 79 different times on this show. But he has that famous quote about him saying, like, he does not know how to write a love song. Like, if you ask him to write, just write a love song,
Right.
he doesn't know how to actually do that. He needs something, character motivation, a setting, something to do that. And so he mentions how, like, this is like the hardest thing it was for this song was like, well, how is he supposed to sing about his love when all he knows is her name? And so then it's like, well, I guess that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to write about the fact that he knows her name and go from there. The other thing that should be mentioned too, like, I don't initially too, they were actually supposed to be Polish Catholic is what the Jets were initially supposed to be. And so that this song was also going to have this religious element to it, which I still think is there. Like, the religious element is still
Definitely
there
in the movie.
I agree. But it's not like, they're not super ultra Catholic either.
Right.
They don't lean into that very much in the actual show itself, which I guess that might be another way that you could adapt this show and like lean way heavily into that, because then this would have even more relevance to that. But sometimes it says specifically that he doesn't like the fact that it's so religious in this song when they're not really shown to be religious in the rest of the show. But I don't know. That's him, I think, being a bit ultra critical in this case.
I think they are, because the thing to know about the new movie, if people don't know, is that it is getting a new script. Like Tony Kushner is rewriting a bit of the script. I think they're digging more into those social issues. They did a lot of research into, I think at that time it was colloquially known as San Juan Hill, but it's what's now Lincoln Square, which is where a lot of these Puerto Ricans lived. And I think they are maybe making that Catholicism a bit larger, because I want to say there was a shot in the trailer where they're like around a cross or something.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think they might be leaning into that more as well.
The more people talk about it, I'm so fascinated to know what that movie is actually going to be. I'm a big fan of Tony Kushner. I think he's done some great adaptations of stuff. I mean, of course, his plays that he's written too have been great. The more I have gone through this Sondheim research and some of the shows I wasn't super familiar with, you can write me letters if you want. I'm sorry. But Arthur Lawrence just seems like a real piece of work in real life. And I feel like isn't actually that good of a writer in many cases. And yet Sondheim speaks very favorably of him. But
I do think it's interesting how Arthur Lawrence, like, I don't know if he like did some stuff in like he had some works in like, the 50s and 60s, namely West Side Story and Gypsy. And then when the revivals came around, he did those revivals and approached the work in a different way. Like Gypsy being the, I think, bigger example of this, where he had written this entire book of Gypsy. And at that time, I think the songs were sort of set off from the show. And so when he approached that 2008 revival, he wanted all the songs to actually exist as part of the show. And like that was how he approached it. And he realized that I think he has a book about it that I also have not read. But he talks about that sort of approach and realization to how it completely changes the show. And like for that, he didn't even change the script or anything. So I think it's interesting how maybe his own style and sensibilities had changed as well, and to how he approached art and musical theater and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's I agree. Like in his later years, he came back and did a couple of productions of Gypsy, the West Side Story revival in 2009 when he was like 91, I think. And I feel like that was him really trying to cement his legacy of like, hey, I was one of the original creators of this stuff too. And really accentuating like the script portions of those shows and being like, yeah, the songs are important, but like, look at the script. And I just feel like it's like, I mean, the Gypsy is a good script. I will admit to that. But like, yeah, the script of West Side Story, like the actual spoken bits are not like amazing.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things also where it's the book of the show has encompassed so much. And for something like this, even though they have Romeo and Juliet as a template, part of the book is the story itself, and part of the book is also the actual dialogue spoken. And then there's also like pacing, placement of songs, that kind of thing. It's all encapsulated in what we consider the book of the show. I mean, I do give him credit for like, you know, this as a concept. And I know it's not solely him, but like turning Romeo and Juliet into at that time modern gang rivalry to talk about different social issues and to sort of change the ending as well of Romeo and Juliet and all that. Like, I think that is definitely an accomplishment. But then the actual dialogue spoken is maybe like every time they say buddy boy, I laugh a little. And like, I know that a lot of those were on purpose, that they try not to use the modern slang of the time, but some of those do sound a little ridiculous now. And maybe they did back then too, I agree. But you know,
I mean, the only thing that I think the interesting part is the word cool, right? Cool is still used nowadays. That's the only one that doesn't sound like completely off kilter. One thing we should also do, as you've probably already heard a bit in this episode, are some of the performers of this song. So just to give some credit, from the original Broadway cast, we have Larry Kurt. From the movie, even though the actor was Richard Beymer, the singer is actually Jimmy Bryant. And then the revival from 2009 is Matt Kavanaugh. And you might even hear some from the 2020 revival, who is Isaac Cole Powell. So Tony, of course, sings Maria, the most beautiful sound I ever heard. And then you hear some voices in the background. Maria, 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 Maria. All the beautiful sounds of the world in a single word. And then the voices continue. Maria, 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 Maria. And then Tony goes in, Maria, I've just met a girl named Maria, and suddenly that name will never be the same to me.
The most beautiful sound I ever heard. Maria, 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 Maria. All the beautiful sounds of the world in a single word. Maria, 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 Maria. I've just met a girl named Maria, and suddenly that name will never be the same to me. Maria, I've just kissed a girl.
What's interesting is they have these sort of like offstage voices repeating Maria, which makes sense because it's sort of like an echo of how he heard her name. But also in the more recent versions, I think the 2009 does it too, but definitely the 2020 version does it. They just have the actor playing Tony saying Maria over and over. And when I saw the 2020 revival, I thought Isaac Powell, like, to be honest, when I heard that Isaac Powell was cast as Tony, I was like, I don't know if he has the ability to carry a show like that. Because I had only known him for playing Daniel in Once on This Island, and that is not really a huge role. And then I saw him, I was like, he's getting a Tony, which is also, to take another tangent, no one playing Tony in West Side Story has ever been nominated for a Tony. And because of the pandemic, that remains true because West Side Story was not eligible for this last round of Tonys and is not reopening. So it must be a curse or something. But during the 2020 revival, when Isaac Powell was singing Maria, that was a song where I was like, he can do all of this. I don't know, just the way he approached it, because of those repeated Marias, it seemed like every time he said it, it was slightly different. It felt like he was actually sort of like savoring it as a word. Like, you know, it's the equivalent of teenagers writing the name of their crush over and over in a notebook, you know, that kind of thing.
Little hearts above the eyes and stuff like that.
And so I thought that was an interesting way to approach it as well. Like, I mean, I think both approaches have their pros and cons, and they do give slightly different interpretations of what is happening inside Tony's head, which is still fairly opaque, even with this song, because I think it's also part of Sondheim being like, I don't know how to do this without them knowing each other.
Yeah, I like that, and I've seen a video version of someone in the audience surreptitiously filming them. What I like about that interpretation, because I think both can work, it just depends on what you're trying to communicate. But what I like about the actor kind of muttering it to themselves is like just what you said. It's like it's almost that obsession that's coming to him too, and I think that helps by the end when people are pushed to murder and like acts of violence and stuff like that. Like you're seeing that obsession coming out right here near the very beginning. And I think what you could do, I talked about this when I did my Redux season here just before this, revisiting Gypsy, where in Rose's turn there's when she does her like mama stuff. Basically, the actor has the option of going as quick or as long as they want. With that, it's written literally in the music about them taking as long as they want. But I think you might be able to like reorchestrate it to do the same thing here. Like take your time. Like, do you want to do this quickly? Do you want to savor it? Like, how do you want to like show that obsession before getting into the song?
I think obsession is a good way to put it. When they're saying it themselves, it's just much more grounded in quote unquote reality, I guess, as much as the show can be, because you're focused solely on the performer and what they're saying. Whereas if you have it as like offstage vocals, then it seems to be more of this like dream space of they're still in like an imaginary state of mind, I guess, where they're just reliving that moment and stuff. And I feel like if you really wanted to, you could even put like a minor ballet behind the scenes there of like
Sure. Yeah.
what Tony is thinking or something. But when it's just Tony singing, that's it. Like it's just Tony.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even in the movie version, like they try and make this visually interesting as much as they possibly can. But really, he's just walking through the streets and walking into like the empty like basketball court and then into like a back alley type of thing. So it's like, yeah, bringing that dreamlike quality of I like that idea of like bringing like a ballet behind him while he's saying this would add to that set dressing where it's not just one person singing on a stage.
Yeah, and I think it also sets the tone for how we want to see this love story too, where is it that he's in love with Maria because he's desperate for this something coming that he's been talking about, and this is like
right.
Like, is it actually real, or is he just like latching on to the first thing he sees? Like, you can sort of play into that, or it can be, it's just obsession with, the first pretty girl he sees that's not part of his community and stuff like that. Like, you can play it so many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, and there is that type of thing where like the quote unquote like exotic can become alluring to people. Mm-hmm. The other unfortunate thing about West Side Story is that the characters are underwritten to quite a degree. I mean, especially Maria herself. Mm-hmm. But like, I guess Tony has a little bit more backstory built into him and in characterization. We spend a little bit more time with him within this show, but it's hard to say. Like we know that he's trying to go to that somewhere, where we know that he's trying to leave the gang and put that behind him. But yeah, what it is or why there is that connection between them is hard to really pinpoint down.
Yeah. And I did like note also, if Sondheim really wanted to be like true to these characters, it is a little surprising that Tony doesn't mention anything about her looks. Because if you think about it, like a teenage boy meeting a girl, falling in love at first sight, like it's very unlikely that he would not have noticed how she looked at all. Well,
this is actually something we brought up when I originally talked about this song. I remember that seems to be like the easy impulse, right? Yeah, mentioning their looks, even like romantic poetry from the 1700s is always about that. Like her lips were as red as rose petals, and her skin was as white as like the freshly fallen snow. Blah blah blah, whatever. And he doesn't do that. And I don't know if it's like intentionally he's not doing that. I do say that Sondheim very rarely actually uses looks when he writes love songs. It's all about other stuff that they're talking about. So yeah, it's very interesting that he doesn't here.
I'm guessing it's intentional because that's the like easy way out, and Sondheim wanted to challenge himself, or like something like that, or maybe he just didn't believe in that. Like if you wanted to play this as the most realistic love story you could, I think it's like a bit of an omission.
Yeah. Have you, what I'm curious though too, like, not to get too personal here or anything like that, but I guess I'll just speak for myself first. I have noticed in any relationship I've been in, there is a weirdness of how that name holds power over you. Like, initially it's because like, oh yeah, like that name, and like they remind you of them, and like there's like that beauty to it. And depending on whether the relationship ends goodly or badly, it still has power over you, right? Because it's like that name. No, I don't know how many friends that have became teachers, like, I can never name my child this because I had a terrible kid in my class named this, right?
Yeah, I do think that's true. Also, especially like when you're in a relationship, then that name sort of becomes like, oh yeah, what are you saying about them? Or like, depending on what the relationship is. And so you're just so used to, I think, reacting to that name when you're in a relationship. But then also it's like, for a situation like this, where you don't really know them, you sort of like make up your own reasons for liking just about anything like that. Like you make up your own reasons for like, yeah, this is why we belong together. We fit so well. And then maybe later you're like, wow, those were totally fake. But you know, at this point where Tony is, it's kind of like, yeah, let me take apart every single moment of the like 5 seconds that we met for, and let me, you know, come up with justifications for why my brain is like, I love this girl. And stuff like that. So I think that's probably how it's being approached. But I also think it's interesting because I was looking at the score for this, and Bernstein is famously known for using the tritone throughout this score, which is known as the devil's chord. It's a diminished fifth for people who know what that is. But I was looking at the score when in the beginning, that part we were talking about where sometimes it's offstage vocals where he's like Maria, 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 and then he goes Maria. And so it sounds like that should be a resolution of like he's turning over this word and then all of a sudden it resolves. But it actually goes from I think it's a perfect fifth and then a perfect fourth to the tritone. And the tritone happens where you'd expect that resolution to happen, which I just think is an interesting usage of it in the score, because that's sort of what launches him into the rest of the song. And it's a little bit like a warning sign or fate or something like that.
Right. There's something off about this. Tony continues on by singing, Maria, I've just kissed a girl named Maria, and suddenly I found how wonderful a sound can be. Maria, say it loud and there's music playing. Say it soft and it's almost like praying. Maria, I'll never stop saying Maria. The most beautiful sound I ever heard. Maria.
I've just kissed a girl named Maria, and suddenly I found how wonderful a sound can be. Maria, say it loud and there's music playing. Say it soft and it's almost like praying. Maria, I'll never stop saying Maria.
So the song isn't especially long here or involved, but again, Sondheim criticizes himself for this rhyming couplet because the word he uses, he thinks it's too wet, which I think is just a way of saying it sounds too sappy. But I love say it loud and there's music playing, say it soft and it's almost like praying. I just think it's a great way to show meaning behind that. Yes, again, probably a gang leader would not say it exactly this way,
Well,
but I don't know.
I feel like we should talk about the character of Tony
Mhm.
a little bit more, because I feel like the way he's been portrayed in the movie, at least, and maybe other productions too, is he's like the nice guy part of the gang. He seems like he's trying to get out of the gang. He's like the pacifist trying to stop everything from happening. But if you actually look at it, and I think this is again one of the things I really enjoyed about the 2020 revival, where he felt like he was a gang member, even when he was seeing something's coming.
Right.
He felt like he was like in the movie. He's very pretty. He's like, he doesn't look
Well,
like.
yeah. I think what you're hitting on here, I guess I had never really connected the dots, but he comes across as a bit of a dork in the movie, right? It's like, how is this guy the leader of a gang?
He's a little hapless.
Yeah.
And the thing is that like Riff is very invested in getting Tony back into the gang. He's like, Tony helped build this gang. He's like an important part of us. We have to be there for Tony. And so it makes you wonder, like, okay, so Tony must be like a big deal in this gang. And you don't become a big deal in a gang just by walking around trying to stop fights from happening, right?
Right.
It does feel in his first in Something's Coming, and the scene that precedes it, that he's like trying to turn over a new leaf. He's like, there's more out there. We don't have to just keep fighting these petty battles about this land that we're all just like both occupying. So it does seem like he wants a way out. So maybe it's like him letting his romantic side loose or something. Like I don't necessarily think that it's. And I think this happens with Maria too. I feel like Sondheim, when he talks about these characters, does sort of downplay their possible intelligence and their, like just because they're gang members doesn't mean they can't be as like eloquent or something. Like, of course, there's, the education levels in that time and like what they would be doing. But it does seem like Tony has possibly put in an effort to be a different person than what the gang might have led him to be.
I don't think this is like an egregious example of it. I think it's more so when they like in Tonight when he talks about the morning star and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, maybe not. That's a little too poetical probably for this character to be using. But yeah, I think in this song he comes across as that person where like, I've met this person, I know their name.
Yeah.
I'm bringing in that religious imagery, which I mean, I'm sure they would have known about anyways. Whether that's explicit or not. So basically I'm saying that this song kind of works for me. Yeah. in within the show.
And with the like religious imagery, I feel like it's not uncalled for, because I think you did mention in your original episode on this song how Maria's probably not a name he's heard very much before with all the other people that they've known, but you do have like Ave Maria.
Yeah.
And so that could be the connection there, where that's why he's like, oh, yeah, like back when I went to church or whatever, assuming that he doesn't go anymore, then like that could be, oh, yeah, that's what it reminds me of. And that's also the sort of emotion he's feeling and the approach that he's taking to this.
Yeah. I guess for you, as we're somewhat ramping up here, is there like, how does this song fit into the score for you? Like, is this like top 5, middle 5, bottom 5? Like, how would you put this song in there?
Maybe middle 5. I think of the Tony songs, I do like Something's Coming a little more. Though
there's more energy to it.
Yeah, but I do think like this is maybe a little more of a showcase for the actor, like because it's so simple. There's so much more as an actor that you can do with it to interpret it. And also, that note at the end that they hold is always great. It's a little more just like, how are we going to approach this relationship? I think it does like sort of help set up that story pretty well. But as a song to listen to, it's not, I'd say maybe middle 5.
No, I agree with that too. This is, of course, also come into popular culture and stuff like that as well. There have been, I was going to say adaptations. There's not adaptations, covers. There's been covers of this song by a bunch of different people. This is from the Stephen and Sondheim Encyclopedia. And there's a huge entry, of course, on West Side Story specifically. But for the song Maria in particular, they write, Bernstein had a draft lyric for this number, but he confessed that it didn't work. And Sondheim said the challenge was to write a song for a couple who barely knew each other. He suggested that one line, say it soft and it's almost like praying, contributed a kind of overall wetness to the lyric, a wetness I regret to say, which persists throughout all the romantic lyrics in the show, but which appealed to my collaborators and which may very well have contributed to the score's popularity. Years later, pop songwriter Paul Simon called the number a perfect love song. So Paul Simon considers this to be like one of the best love songs of all time.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's why he wrote Cecilia.
Yeah. Well, I think to speak again to that sort of like wetness that Sondheim feels, I think this also goes back to the like romanticism and suspension of disbelief of the show. Like you can just throw it into that same category as gang members doing ballet of that sort of like overarching just romantic sensibility to make this show work correctly. And so I don't think anybody who is watching this show most of the time is really trying to dig too much into the characters, because it is
also true.
Stylized retelling, which it's so interesting how they decided to do commentary in this show, because it's from a first glance not a show that you'd think would be the type to have commentary. Like it's, it's ballet and it's romantic and it's like, a love story. And then all of a sudden you're just like throwing on social commentary in there.
It's like, wait, what? Yeah.
So it's weird how it works that way. But I think that's probably also part of why people don't really mind the lyrics that much. And they're not really trying to.
Well, that's the other thing is like
for us.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Sondheim has said this, and there's other composers who've said this. Like, no one cares about the lyrics when they go and see a Broadway show. They care about the music and if it's fun. Like that's all they care about. The other place I think we should mention that this has appeared in most recent years is I don't know if you call it like a music video or not, but almost like Praying by oh my God. Lin-Manuel Miranda. I was trying to say Lin-Miranda Manuel. I'm like, that's not how those three names go together. By Lin-Manuel Miranda. This was right after Hurricane Maria kind of devastated Puerto Rico. And this is him trying to like raise money for the cause to help rebuild it.
It's almost like praying. It's almost like praying. It's almost like
Cabo Rojo, Corozal, Naguabo, Guaynabo, San Lorenzo y San Germán, San Sebastián y mi viejo San Juan, Isabela, Maricao, Fajardo, Dorado, Hormiguero, Sumacao, Trujillo, Atillo, Vega Baja, Toa Alta, Toa Baja, Mayagüez, otra vez, Aguadilla, Quebradilla, Guayabilla, Juanadilla, Cicayey.
it's almost like praying.
But it is interesting to watch this video and how the lyrics kind of do tie into that to that tragedy with
It's interesting in the way that it sort of changes the meaning of the lyrics, because it's, if you think about this, like, natural disaster, say it loud and there's music playing, like, it's a hurricane. It is like very chaotic and loud and there's things going on. And then say it's soft and it's almost like praying when the hurricane's over and there's so much devastation, like sometimes the only thing you can do is pray,
right.
So it does work really well for that and work in such a different context. And of course, because the hurricane was also named Maria, everything just came together. Which also, this is more of a tangent, but I don't know. I think there was a podcast episode on this where he talks about how he brought everyone together to record this video in like 2 days or something.
Yeah, I think it came about really quickly.
Yeah, it was very fast. It's pretty impressive, to be honest. But but yeah, this was a really, like, what I remember when I first heard this song, I was like, whoa, like everything just fits together so well. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really fascinating when there's songs that can be reinterpreted for a different context. Like, they didn't really change the words, but the meaning has actually absolutely changed. I think that's always so interesting when that happens.
Yeah.
Well, that is Maria. We have a few other episodes, of course, planned going forward. I guess, Christine, if people wanted to follow you and keep up to date, how could they do so online?
Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter at Across the Arch. And I also have another Broadway podcast, which is soon to be up and running again, called Bottomless Broadway. So you can look that up if you want to hear me and my co-hosts talk about generally more modern Broadway musicals. And you can also follow us at Bottomless Bway on Instagram or Twitter.
Cool. Well, up next, we're going to get into more commentary with the song America, both versions. So
Should be fun.
we'll talk about that next week. Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network, to Rumi, and to the Alberta Association of Optometrists this week. Putting Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we're going to America. I'm sure I'll have nothing critical to say. As always, a big thank you to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.